Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for the second panel discussion, Eradicating Corruption, Upholding Good Governance.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I am actually feeling very honored and privileged to be actually moderating this session. You do see the eminent speakers and panelists with me. I'm going to start off by introducing them first. However, I'm going to already put it out there. I'm not going to do justice to their accolades and the effort that they have put in this journey of anti-corruption. So please bear with me. I've only chosen highlights because I have a selfish interest that you should have the most about hearing from them, right? So let me start off with Dr. Mohan. He's currently the president of Transparency International, former MBA lecturer at Victoria University. He also did business and sustainability in Sunway College, certified lead auditor, and by profession, he's an engineer. I'm going to move on to Cynthia, and I'm sure many of you recognize her as a key advocate for human rights and good governance. She's also the executive director of the Center to Combat Corruption and Cronyism. Recently, the US State Department named her as one of the anti-corruption champions for 2022. So, well done. Thank you. I also want to say, in this same year, she has been awarded the 2022 International Women of Courage. So, well done. Now, moving on to Datuk Anis. No short of accolades as well, Principal Fellow at Institute of Ethnic Studies, UKM, former Deputy Director General of the National Center of Governance, Integrity and Anti-Corruption with the Prime Minister's Department, Director General of the National Integrity and Good Governance Department. He has also served as President and Chief Executive Officer of the Malaysian Institute of Integrity. Just fantastic panelists and speakers. Now, actually, when I was preparing this session with the panelists and speakers, one of the things that I spoke to them about was, although I'm sure many of you here would like to hear their views on all of the various things that are happening out there at the moment with the nation and what transitions that are happening, I'd like very much for them to also focus on what you and I and the corporates can do on our part, in our capacity. However, I've also heard Dr. Terence speak this morning, and I must say all three panelists had very good views. I could not help myself but pick one or three graphics that he showed about how the GLCs are becoming a very pertinent influencer in the business environment, and just from the way they can make decisions on investment and how governments are going to play a role in that sense. So I think there's a much broader area that we have to cover, but also I do want to use your expertise to talk about how we, the corporate, can do our part on this. So with that, I'm going to start off by just asking the three panelists a very rudimentary question. All of you have also answered it, but I would like to start with yours. So the question we put out to the audience on a poll was, at what level are we as a nation in eradicating corruption and upholding governance? So there were four choices: initial stages, developing, growth, and mature. So I'd like to start off with Dr. Mohan. Where do you think we sit in this?
In my view, we are still at the growth stage.
Growth stage?
Yes.
All right. I'm going to hold first before actually telling you all what the public thought. Yourself, Cynthia?
In my opinion,
yes,
we walk one step forward and then we walk two steps backwards. So we're not really growing. We're not really initial because we do know the problem, but we're also caught in a very deep structural situation that makes it very difficult for us to march forward with maturity. So I'd say none in the circle.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much for that. And Dato' Anis, yourself.
I have to agree with the majority. So this is democracy.
They have actually put it up there.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
I think not just one step ahead, two step back. We have moved many steps. People like Tan Sri Megat have been working on all this long time ago. We are ready to achieve what we set for, except for all the other problems that came in, which pulls us back. If you look at the corruption perception index, we have been on this roller coaster ride. Up, down, up. Highest was 5.3 before the old counting. Lowest was 4.3, then went up. And 2019, we went up to 53, and then now down again. And I think if we're not careful, if we don't do anything more, we will go down to 43. Okay. Mark my word. Dr. Mohan will attest to this, that by next year when he announced, the result will be 43.
Absolutely. So I gave both of you all a chance to give your insights, but Dr. Mohan, you said growth. And ladies and gentlemen, we have differing views here, so please use this panel wisely. I think we can get different angles from where they are coming from, and please use and do ask questions.
Okay, the reason I felt it is still at a growth stage, simply because we are not starting from zero base. I mean, as far as the government is concerned, we have change in governments and so on, but the various agencies are still there, you know. So the structure, the how to get forward is all there. This temporary setback, as what Cynthia says, moving one step forward and moving toward, it's because of some changes in political changes that we have seen. But I feel that if you put in the right people, perhaps this is the right time with the new government showing commitment for reforms and governance and so on. So I think we can grow from this stage. That's the reason why I chose we are in that 17% segment.
Right. So what I took away from the three of you, right, was we do have some framework, policies put in place. We still have a long journey in terms of whether we have the right provisions and exceptions being implemented. And I think a large majority of the folks who answered the poll also felt we are in the development state. And I appreciate all of the feedback. So with that, I'm now going to actually get the first speaker to share his thoughts. And I'm going to hand it over to you, Dr. Mohan, to take us through your topic.
Sure. All right. I think the slides, please. All right. So in my short 10 minutes talk today, basically, where do I press? Up there. Okay.
The green one. Could we have somebody help us out here, please? Yes. Okay. Yeah.
All right. So what I just want to quickly discuss with you, we talk about governance and transparency, integrity, accountability, and so on. In my view, I think we have a fundamental problem. It's a cultural gap that we have across the board, whether in the public sector or private sector. Maybe not so serious about in the private sector, because some organizations, the bigger ones, you have a very structured governance framework and so on. But what about the SMEs? Many of the SMEs have no framework or even a structure for good governance. So we have a problem there as well. Of course, in the public sector, we have a bigger problem. Okay, let me just take you. All right. So we talked about transparency and accountability, and we have a culture, organizational cultural gap. You know, when I say organization culture gap, it can be in the private sector, it can be in the what I call public sector. Okay, let me just give you just quickly a couple of examples. You all will recall about the exposure of the LCS, Littoral Combat Ship case. All right, we had a 9 billion budget for ships to be delivered, 6 billion paid, not a single ship came in. Until today, we don't have a full picture of what really happened. Question is, when projects are implemented, every project for that matter, even in the private sector, you have milestones. You have to report. If it's a big project, the board will want to know, where are you, you know? So what happened to all this in this case, Ministry of Defense? What happened? Why there was no red flags? Don't tell me that all the civil servants were not aware of this. Why is it that they kept quiet? So these are the questions that we have to ask. And definitely somebody has to be accountable. So the transparency is not there, the accountability is not there. So I think we seriously have a problem. Okay, another example I can give you. Just a few days ago, just 4 or 5 days ago, all of us heard in the news in the Minister of Transport. Okay, now you know the LRT. I think all of us here have traveled in the LRT, and this is a public service that the government provides. Can you imagine? Number of escalators and number of lifts are not working. Now, the minister didn't want to say that, and I know why. He felt that that is not his focus. He wanted to get these elevators and escalators fixed. But what about those CEOs and the VPs or whatever directors or the people in charge? Where is the accountability? The right way should be immediately somebody has to resign and say that, I'm sorry, I screwed it up, I will leave. But that culture is not there. They're just happily keeping quiet and, and so on. So this is where what I'm saying is we have a problem, and I think we have to bring that culture, whether in the public sector or what. So that's where people have to speak up. Now, probably this picture, some of you know who is this. This is in Facebook. She was in the head of the, one of the chief in the compliance unit in Facebook, and she was fired when she blew the whistle about data leaks. Whereby Facebook actually was using all our data. If we are all have signed up having a Facebook account, our data was leaked, and she exposed it. And for that, she was removed from the company. She was actually removed from the department, and then she quit. So we have to fight this. We have to speak up. This is our problem. Okay. All right. Now, there is some statistics I just want to give you. The trend in Malaysia, this survey was done by PwC Global Economic Crime and Fraud Survey. You see, there is a sharp decline between 2018 and 2020. In 2018, there was 42% were actually giving information, were speaking up, were exposing. But in 2020, a similar survey was done by PwC, a sharp drop to about 14%. And this is very worrying, because only through tip-offs and whistleblowing, we can actually fix the problem. If you don't have the information, very difficult to investigate and so on. Another statistics I want to share with you, attitude of our citizens. This was a survey done by Transparency International. We call it Global Corruption Barometer 2020. And the question was asked, there were several questions, but I just picked one question and just want to show you among countries in ASEAN. Except Philippines, there was no data, and Singapore was discarded because the corruption level is low in Singapore. Now look at it. You can see here the question was asked, percentage of those who agree that it is socially acceptable to report corruption. And where do you see Malaysia is? We are the worst. 48%. Margin of error, let's say, I think it's 2%, 2 to 3%, okay, out of a sample of 1,000. So, what does it mean? It does mean that Malaysians generally, we don't have the right attitude to speak up when wrongdoings, we find that there are wrongdoings done. You know, there's a Malay saying, I always say, jangan jaga tepi kain orang. You know, that means don't be a busybody lah. Yeah, the fellow's rice bowl lah. Don't put sand on his rice bowl lah. This is the kind of attitude we have. Okay, so this is something that I would like to bring to your attention. And look at the trend that we are going. You know, Datuk Anis talked about the Corruption Perception Index. Look at the trend. Over the since 2019, we had a rebound after the high-profile cases, 1MDB, SRC, many people were charged and so on. But after that, from 2019 onwards, we are in a downtrend. And you can see from this barometer, if you are moving to the left, actually we should be moving to the right. We are in the wrong direction. All right, so we have dropped 5 points in 3 years. Next month, we'll be releasing the 2022 results. We don't know how the results will be. Some are predicting going up, going down. Some say maybe the other way around. Let's see, all right? Okay, so in closing, I just have one message for you. As Malaysians, we must speak up. This is the message I want to give you. You saw my profile. I was once a whistleblower, and I became a witness for MACC. It was a long journey, 10 years in the court, going to court and coming and so on. And that time there was no Whistleblower Protection Act, and I was ready to do it. So if I could do it, I'm sure you can do it. Speak up, whether you're in the private sector or public sector, you have to speak up. Okay? With that, I thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mohan. Actually, a few things stood out for me, and Dr. Mohan spoke about transparency and accountability. He also, shared the statistics on 48% of us, the nation. We feel that it's socially acceptable to, have corruption happen in front of us. Now, all of this, right, gives us both the tangents. We have frameworks, we have policies, but yet accountability, you and I and the corporates who are part of this ecosystem really play an important role. So thank you, Dr. Mohan. I'm going to now hand it over to Cynthia to take us through her presentation.
Is it okay if I stand up?
Absolutely, yes, please.
Yeah, so you can see me a little bit better. A bit tiny next to these two handsome gentlemen. Okay, my topic for today is called the unity government must commit to reform institutions. So I wanted to say two things in the short time that I have, is that thank you, first of all, to the MIM for this invitation. It's very timely. I'm not sure whether you organized this in quick speed because of the new government or it was already in focus. Now, why is it timely? Because we have a very interesting political landscape before us. I think all of us will agree, no matter which background we come from. Something really out of this world. We've never had a taste of a unity government, and we now see potential, real potential and possibility in actually reforming institutions and reforming some parts of the system. But we're also not naive about anything, because we already saw in 2018 Pakatan Harapan trying to do several things, but not succeeding on many things, and not showing full commitment on many things. So there was disappointment, there was enthusiasm, there was hope that was dwindling, and then the government fell before the end of its mandate because of an internal coup, and we know what happened. But my message of what I'm trying to talk about today is that as much as we heard the first session talk about corporate fraud, corporate governance, how the public administration needs to be reformed, there is a very big fundamental question for all of us to answer here today, which is, what is it that the corporate sector and the business community can actually do to help make things right? Because a lot of the work that we do, together with Dr. Mohan, Dr. Anis, Prof. Terence, and a lot of the work and research that C4 carries out, one very obvious thing is we know in this country, business and politics are very intertwined. Business and politics are not separable. And we know there is a problem of money flowing through the political system. We saw in the earlier presentation about how GLCs are so warped in the whole system of poor accountability, political appointments, etc. But the key issue here is about money. And it's about how money actually helps people in power stay in power. And the less accountability, the less transparency, the easier it is for them. So Dr. Mohan's point, fantastic about why citizens need to speak up, but every time we speak up, we are the ones that get hauled up to the police. And we are the ones that are shamed and slammed on national media sometimes, like as if we are the bad guys actually calling for answers. So the point is this. What I'm trying to say is the people I'm talking to today are the essential movers of how this country is going to move in the next few years. Because you're the ones in the business community that wield a lot of influence when it comes to moving the economy forward post-pandemic, moving the economy forward, providing more jobs for people, providing more oomph and momentum that has been lacking in the last few years. But in doing so, where is corruption and addressing corruption in the whole big picture. And I'm saying that, if anything, the persons who are listening in, the audience that are participating, have the answers to how we should be dealing with this unity government. So I wanted to say a couple of things. For the first time, we have a law ministry with an additional title of Reformasi Institusi, or reforming institutions. It's never actually been so blatant, because I think a lot of the work we've done in the past has actually shown that the institutions we have today, as was mentioned in the first panel, is entirely not independent. It has very, very strong interference and influence from the government. And it has also issues of how business interplays with how these institutions actually work. And I'm talking about real cases of the judiciary, where the Chief Justice had actually lodged a police report, where there was a case of Eka Solutions coming to light that there were allegations of how she was actually being involved in fixing the judgments. So these kind of corporate cases that come to the judiciary are very important, because the Chief Justice is a woman of integrity. And how do you actually ensure that all the judges in the judiciary can actually carry out their work without pressure from the corporate community to actually work towards certain cases? Similarly, with MECC, we have seen a lot of the cases don't actually arrive at conclusions that become very obvious. Serba Dynamic, another case in which the Attorney General had actually withdrawn charges against Serba Dynamic, when actually the leak that was exposed by the Securities Commission was so big that it was actually criminal in nature. And if we were actually serious about corporate governance, we should be taking steps to do all these things. So in moving a more independent Attorney General's office, what is it that the business community can help civil society work together with us to actually call for this new ministry now to actually look at a more independent Attorney General's office? What can we do to make the MECC more independent? How can the Chief Commissioner be appointed in a way that has public confidence? Now Prime Minister just takes someone out from his pocket, someone he likes, and say, okay, this is going to be my new MECC chief. That cannot be the culture that Dr. Mohan is stressing, that we actually need a system that actually works for us in the business, works for us in civil society, and works for us as ordinary citizens. So in the last point, I know time is running out, I wanted to talk to all of us as people, citizens. We all just voted in the elections. Color is still not coming out of our nails. So I'm still looking, sometimes I go and see, people's hands, whether still got that stain, whether they voted or not. And I noticed that almost all of us did a great job by voting. But as citizens, what is it that we can take away from today's conference? And I think there's a lot. We go to work as corporations, as people who are very influential in business, but at the heart of how we go back every day and enjoy the quality of life, we are actually citizens. And I just want to take that point again by Dr. Mohan. It's actually a crying shame that our transport minister would go on saying that our LRT line is horrifyingly not working and not actually moving the way third world country moving towards developing status should be functioning. Half the time, it's malfunctioning. We are paying taxes, right? And we're not getting the services that are due. And it's at that level that we also need to function, we also need to speak up, and we also need to say that if we are moving towards building a corruption-free country, we cannot leave this question to politicians alone, because they're not the ones who are going to solve our problems. Politicians are full of issues themselves. It has to be us demanding accountability. It has to be us in the business community actually calling for a more accountable country. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Cynthia. So I took away a couple of things. I'm sure it resonated to all of us. the business and politics in it's so interwoven in our country, and that we all have an opportunity to play a part, to be collaborative with the civil society, for us to demand accountability and demonstrate the courage to do that. So thank you so much for that. I'm going to hand it over to Datuk Anis to take us through his presentation.
Can you hear? All right, great. I'm going to follow my sister in the stand. She's the champion, so she knows how to deliver the message. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Very quickly, this is a very crucial conversations, and I think time to move forward. I mean, we know the problem, but what are the solutions? And I want to share some of the solution. I just have a quick comment on this topic, building towards a corrupt-free nation, fighting corruption and embracing a culture of compliance for good governance. I think this is good, but embracing a culture of compliance may not be good, because then people just comply. I think we need to understand what we are doing, not to just comply because there's a box that you have to tick and say we have done this. So understanding it, that's why this session, this particular panel, is to talk about eradicating corruption, upholding good governance, and I want to focus on upholding values-driven governance. Earlier on, I've heard Mr. Ganesh already gave the capital G and lowercase g governance definition, and of course, Dr. Terence, my friend, have already torn apart what corporate governance didn't do to us. So I have 5 points that I want to share very quickly. So the first one is values-driven governance. Second, monitoring governance. Third is foresight and anticipatory governance. Fourth is SDG, Sustainable Development Goals and governance. And finally, impacts of COVID-19 pandemic and governance. The first one, the key point, in organization today, whenever we try to measure any progress, we gauge it based on some economic figures. So it must be a number. So we say that profit has been made and all that. But we don't really look at the value brought in by the people who achieve that. So if the guy is very diligent, is honest, is integrity, not counted. Therefore, people will do because they'll get bonus and for the wrong reason. And hence, we have all the problems we're facing today. So I'm pushing for values-driven governance, because ultimately, the human-centric part is what we need. If they have that, then all these other issues that we are talking about will not be there, because we have people who have integrity, and that value is key in whatever we do. As I mentioned, the gentlemen earlier have already re-examined the term, but on good governance, when I was working with UNDP, one of the things I learned is that we have this key element of how we measured good governance. There are 8 factors. First is participation. Second is rule of law. Third is transparency. Fourth, responsiveness. Fifth is consensus-oriented. Sixth is equity and inclusiveness. 7, effectiveness and efficiency. And finally, accountability. All this is not the system. It's not the process of governance. These are all individual. It's the person who's doing this must follow the rule of law, must participate, must be transparent, must be responsible, must be consensus-oriented. It's the person. So if we look at good governance from the system without looking at the human being and the values that that person has, then we miss a very big point. Going back to history, in 2004, when Tun Abdullah Badawi was Prime Minister, he introduced National Integrity Plan. And important for us to be reminded, in that plan, the model that he used very much look at the sectors focus, which are all human beings, the administrative, the economic, the private sector, the politician, to keep them apart, not the politics and the business start clapping their hand and we have problems. But the backbone of this turtle model that we talk about is the family institution. So family institution plays an important part in building up the values of society. So this is key. Community and civil society support. And what kept this turtle on the right path is that flap, the rudder of the ship is the religious institution. So this again, back to the values-driven governance that we must instill. When I went to Integrity Institute, my first round, this is the first political integrity book, which I did in 2007. And in that book, if you look at the key messages and the focus is very much on leadership, and the leaders. While we want people to have integrity, but the leaders must also show the right example. And I remember in Tun Abdullah Badawi's maiden speech that he made in Parliament on the 3rd of November 2003, he said that people who've been given position of power must act with responsibility. So he was using the word amanah and tanggungjawab. The accountability word in Malay is fantastic. Tanggung, kalau tanggung, kena jawab. You tak jawab sekarang, you jawab later. So these are the things that we need to instill. We can go on talking about the problems in the country, but the solution is what we want. How do we inculcate this? In fact, when I did this book, we found out the problems because of very much focus on system rather than the person. So my second tour to the Malaysian Institute of Integrity, I decided that we had to focus on the young people. So we developed a module for kindergarten. Fantastic. We did a pre and post test. Some of the parents came and asked the teacher, what were you teaching our kids? So the teacher explained, I said, oh, no wonder. My daughter came home and told me, Ma, you have no integrity. Serve them right. Sometimes you need to do this. That was the reason. I think sometimes we need our kids to remind us. Monitoring governance is key. All of you, in whatever work you do, in whatever company, I think you need to monitor this. And there are many ways of how we do it. Of course, this is the classic case. Dr. Mohan every year will announce, and I've already predicted in 2 months' time when he announced, our score will go down to 43. 45, 43, because of all the things that have been done. I mentioned about the roller coaster, but this is important. What are the surveys, these sub-indices of measuring CPI? They look at all these 9. When I was at JICC, we studied this inside out, and we formed committee, and not just form committee, we come up with a working model of how we can improve on each of these. Because corruption is not just MSCC's job, it's everybody's job. Companies, organization, if you want people to come and invest in your business, you need to look at, like for example, ease of doing business. People wouldn't come because things are so slow. So these are the things that we have to improve. We can talk about the problems, but until we have the solution, we're not going to get far. Of course, the National Anti-Corruption Plan was something that I know Dr. Mohan have been pushing the government to do. I helped to develop this, and I'm, that this is not something that we plucked from the thin air. It was based on empirical evidence. There's data based on actual data that we came up with a plan. So we monitor this, and these are important. Public procurement have been named as the worst, the easiest for people to take money from public funds for personal gain. And even that, we are still struggling. The framework of NACP is very clearly focusing on the 6 focus areas. We put political governance as number 1, because that's mother of all corruption, 1MDB. So there, you need to fix it. Public sector, because 60% of the people who are involved in corruption are people in the civil service. That's fact. Public procurement, another area, 42%, as I showed earlier, the problems in public procurement. Then, of course, you need to make sure your judiciary, you have proper magistrates and judges who understand the corruption cases so that they can be dealt with quickly. And this law enforcement agency, another culprit. We have to deal with them. The police, the customs, the immigration, the kind of things that the country lost in terms of tax collection because of some of these people. And finally, all of you who are in the business, you want to create a clean business environment, so corporate governance becomes important. And I agree with Dr. Terence. We have to deal corporate governance using our own mold. You cannot just take whatever the Western have done and try to address it. So all these are important things, and I developed these nation indicators because to have our own mold, Dr. Terence, and to look at transparency, restore accountability, efficiency and effectiveness, and some examples so company can look at the indicators we use here for you to then come up with a plan in improving governance in your organization. These are key. If you don't have, you cannot manage what you cannot measure. So there must be key outputs that you can really look at. So let me move to the third point. Foresight. Foresight is so important. What we are dealing today, and technology changed so fast. You know, when we did the anti-corruption plan, I think Cynthia joined the foresight meeting. We really look at the possibilities. How are we going to deal? My time is up. I'm going to finish. Sorry, that's part of integrity. Can I take Dr. Mohan and Cynthia's 3 minutes? Because they spoke less than 10 minutes.
He's putting me on the spot.
It's injury time. Now, Tansi Megat and I, we play rugby. That's that injury time always in the rugby game. So, you imagine with all this blockchain technology, my question I always ask my colleague in MACC, do you have the technology how to catch people when people start use all this technology? They don't. So we are far behind. So we have, things are getting more sophisticated, we have to also be sophisticated. So companies must then be prepared for all these things that are coming. So if you don't know what's happening in the next 10 years, here, we have to look at the black swan. These are the challenge that we have to face. If you don't, we have problem. Let me quickly, sustainable development, this will be very fast. You know, people in the UN have been talking by 2030, hardly 7 years to go. This is what global wants to achieve as governance on SDG 16. But I kept arguing with my friends in the UN. I said, you cannot just put governance in SDG 16. Governance should be in every sustainable development goals agenda. Malaysia, we claim that we have achieved number 1, SDG 1, poverty. But I challenge, I was speaking at EPU last week. I said, how can we eradicate poverty? We said we have done well, but SDG 2 is still in red. There are people, you go behind Chocolate and all the soup kitchen, people are still queuing up, no food. We know people who are poor. But there must be some governance problem there, leakages. So each and every one of those you need to really look at. And finally, my last point, this is a book that came out. I did this with Ramanambong, Press published this. But it was a study commissioned by UNDP because we know that the economic loss of COVID, a lot of things being done. But what about governance? And I think Dr. Terence mentioned in his talk that companies must go and look at what happened. People just throw governance out of window just because of Emergency Act and all these things they were doing. A lot of the lost generation, the problem, you're going to be employing new employees who went to university and stayed at home. Whether they have the right skill, these are things that we have to look at. So I hope that this article that I wrote, Building a Place Called Trust, will be a reality. And I dream of a place where one day we will be like the Isles of Skye. If I can read that, doors in homes are left unlocked in this place. One can leave cars with the windows open, and the only thing that will enter is the rain. This is called integrity. This is called good governance. This is what I envision for our country. This is what I pray that one day every nook and cranny of Malaysia will become, and that we do not take what does not belong to us, and we guard and protect with all we have what is given to us to honor. With that, I thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Anis. He spoke about 5 points. What really stands out for me is recognizing human-centric value in governance. Now, just so that I give an opportunity for the questions from the floor, I'd like to ask Kabi if we have any questions. Yeah.
There are some questions.
Okay.
What's your solution for government staffs who thinks corruption it's part of their culture?
Any takers?
Okay, maybe I will touch a bit, and maybe the others can add. Well, you see, the way I see the problem is there are very good civil servants, because you're saying government employees and so on. They really want to actually expose. But because of the way, for example, the Whistleblowing Act that we have in 2010, there is a provision for protection. Those who go to the 7 agencies, you can get protection. But if you really scrutinize this, the Whistleblowing Protection Act 2010, there is a lot of flaw in this act. And I'll just pick on one particular area, is the Section 6 of this act, which we, civil society, has been fighting for this, to make the amendments. And the civil servants are the most affected by this clause, because it says that when you come and report, you will be given protection. However, if you violate other laws, then this protection will be withdrawn. Now, for a civil servant, when they are employed, they have already signed for, under the Official Secrets Act, they cannot reveal a lot of things that is going on. Jadi macam mana? How are they going to come out and expose? So that is the problem. So we need to actually address those issues, actually to help the civil servants to speak up. Okay, that's one of the solutions. Maybe I think others could add.
So can I just piggyback on what he has said, and going back to your presentation, Dato' Anis, you talked about value-driven, human-centric values and in governance. And I think a large part of that, while values are very important, there's this fear that is, whether it is in an individual, organizations, what is the repercussions to, for instance, my business and so forth. So I would like to go to your presentation, and what are your thoughts around that? How do we help a situation of such?
I think it's partly out of ignorance. This whole Whistleblowing Act is not understood by many people. I hold some key agencies responsible for not doing advocacy to promote and explain to people. If you really look at Whistleblowing Act thoroughly, people will feel safe because there's a methodology of how their report, their complaint are being handled. Nobody else will know, to protect their names and all that, assuming that this is what's being the practice. So both out of ignorance and people who are implementing may not also understand. So we need to really go back to the laws. Perhaps the Member of Parliament must call back these particular laws that they have, relook at it, and improve where it's necessary. Reform of laws, these are the kind of things that you need to look at. When we talk about reform institution, these are some of the things that have been around, but not functioning well. Because if we do a test in this hall, how many people know there is that act of, I think 9/11, or what's the number of that? The act of whistleblowing. Anybody know that we have this act? Do you know there is a Witness Protection Act in the country? Yes, no? See? So we have a problem. These are the things we need to educate the rakyat. People need to understand. And the rakyat also must know to be responsible when they go. You don't want people to simply go and if they don't like the boss, they go and start to report things that you cannot hold on. So it has to be based on real evidence. But you don't go and blab, like some people, they call press conference. I want to whistleblow. I'm telling the whole world. Then you already reveal yourself. Who's going to protect you? Of course you get in trouble. But how you do it is also based on your knowledge of what is covered by the Act. I think that's important. People need to know. Go back to the law. If it's not clear, we have to review it and make it clear. If it's not known to the public, you must make sure some agency is responsible to disseminate the information and do the advocacy program. I think that's important.
So while I heard both of you and rightfully pointed out there are exceptions, but there's also the need for awareness of those policies, and how do you actually then effect it in a way properly for yourself. But Cynthia, you were going to say something, so sorry for interrupting, please go ahead.
So I wanted to provide another angle to the question that was being raised. Because while we are having this conference, there was something very interesting that was going around social media already. There's a circular from government as of the cabinet meeting yesterday saying that lantikan politik in the
GLCs.
finance ministry has been ended effective immediately. So there's a bigger issue here about, apart from with civil servants speaking up, there's a bigger issue of the control of the civil service and how it has been facing a downslide and a rot for so long. We have a problem of many layers of problems. One of the big ones is lantikan politik, which has no accountability, as what we were talking about just now. So we live in very interesting times. Every day there is an announcement that is difficult to digest because it's something new. And if the lantikan politik in Ministry of Finance, which has so many badan berkanun and statutory bodies, has been ended effective immediately, what does that mean for the country in terms of future appointments, in terms of how
People will not honor
good
contract
candidates will actually come on board? I mean, what's the next step? What's the system and all that? No, so I think we're talking some very interesting things here about the civil service, and again, coming back to connecting with our reality about how public procurement, which involves the private sector and the public sector and the PPPs and all that, actually can have a more hopeful future where there will be a more transparent system of tenders and so on. So first few days already, this government is talking about 7 billion flood mitigation issues, didn't follow the tender process and all. So there's a lot of layers to fix in the civil service. And I think the more end of the line problem is how people can start reporting. But now it's also about bringing out the issues that need to be addressed by the administration. And so all these plans that Dr. Anis spoke about, it's really time for it to be operationalized.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. Any other questions that you want to bring up before I go into? Yeah? Okay, so there was statistics that I actually came across, which is from the Global Corruption Barometer. And two main things that I want to highlight. One is 15% of Malaysians use personal connections to get public services. 13% used paid bribery to get their business services rendered. Now, when you see this kind of statistics, what is the impact on public procurement and your thoughts on that? Do you want to go ahead first, Dr. Mohan? I'll let.
Okay. All right. Okay, this is statistics coming from Global Corruption Barometer in 2020. And basically, this is a survey done. And basically what it means is, in reality on the ground, when you want to get licenses or you want to get certain approvals and so on, there is bribery taking place. Even when I do my own training programs and things like that, we say don't do this and don't do that, you know, we're like just like what we are talking about here, you know, value system and so on. During break time, participants will come quietly and see me. Yeah, you say that, you know, but in reality, you know, how difficult for us like SMEs, how to get things moving. You don't pay, nothing moves. They're waiting for this, right from whatever agencies you're talking about, whether it's customs or whatever it is, okay? So we have this problem happening. That is why I said earlier that this has to be a collective effort. And the fastest way to do it is the people. You have to say no, and it has to start from there. So definitely the impact of this will be the rakyat, because at the end of the day, the cost of services that we get, because all this money or whatever bribes or whatever being paid to this organization, they have to recover the cost. So where are they going to do? They're going to add on to the product or services. So at the end, we are the loser as taxpayers. You know, so the figures are there. These are survey figures, and I definitely believe these figures. The big problems are especially in the SMEs. As I said earlier, the bigger companies, you have a very structured governance and so on, system, framework and so on. But the SMEs, they don't have anything. In fact, it's a norm in the organizations. If you talk to some of the executives in the company, this is what my boss thought. How you want to do business? Macam mana mau buat business? Ini biasa bah. This is the way to do. You know. So this is the feedback I get. You know. So I fully agree. And the only way out is to put a stop to this is don't give. But this, they alone cannot do. This whole thing, like what Cynthia said just now, this is a start. Every day we are getting some new things and so on. Hope this momentum can continue. The National Anti-Corruption Plan is a very comprehensive plan. It has everything inside there. Question is execution. Until today, only 33% has been executed. We only have left 1 year left, 2023, and finish. So that is why we need to move forward collectively. The government has to play their part. Civil society have to play their part. We, Rakyat, have to play their part. We have to be the watchdog. We have to speak up. Okay?
So anchoring on that point, in terms of collective action from all of us, Cynthia and Dr. Anis, any other thoughts on this?
Education. I think we start accepting that this is the norm. Everybody's doing it. So why not we educate people and show there are companies who are doing well without having to bribe? I know a few. They can still win tenders, doing the right thing. I think we have to highlight those things. These are the stories that are not being told. Media can play a role to highlight. These are key, because people, without understanding that there's a right way of doing things, then they fall short for following the wrong role model. I think we need to do the right thing. That's key. Sound idealist, yes, but you need to be idealistic to continue to fight this. Otherwise, easily, might as well we just say, fine, why are we having this conference? Let's just follow the norm. But there's a new norm now. And what is this new norm that we have to then challenge the system?
Yeah. And you rightfully pointed out about the education and awareness, right? I think data is power. And really, I go back to the presentation that I saw today, and I'm somewhat reformed in that sense, because I come from a multinational myself. So a large part of what I've actually experienced is how investors come in, how do we convince them that we are a good nation to, a company to come into, and so forth. But when I saw Dr. Terence, what should I say, it's mind-blowing to see how the GLCs and the network that is being propagated in that sense. But I do think that power of information is very powerful for each and every one of us to start thinking differently and to play our parts on how do we then effect change. Yeah, so thank you for that. And going back to Cynthia. Cynthia, do you have any points on this conversation that we have just had? So we had, collaboratively work together, education, yourself.
Well, I think there's two other things. Now corporates are bound by Section 17A of the MACC Act. It's an interesting addition to whistleblower protection element, because now corporates are duty-bound to ensure that whether you're an SME or a big MNC, you have to have mechanisms for the rights for reporting persons to place a complaint for it to be investigated. And this should be something that is going to be in the amendments of the Whistleblower Protection Act as well, that we have been working together with the Law Ministry to actually put forward. So Section 17A is an interesting element, but it needs to be properly enforced, and the enforcing agency is MACC. So now it is back to whether it can be properly enforced. And one is, now you are compelled to have mechanisms in place for reporting persons to come forward and lodge complaints, and how it will be investigated, etc. So that one is not so much creative, but it's about the law. And strengthening whistleblower protection, strengthening Section 17A through enforcement will actually help the situation a lot. But I was in another meeting and some other discussion. I found it very interesting that in free trade agreements and bilateral trade agreements, there are more and more components of trying to clarify anti-corruption clauses in there. And whether that's something the MIM and other business interest groups would work with us to actually push for these clauses to take place. So now Malaysia has signed the CTTPP. And the US is pushing for the Indo-Pacific Economic Forum and all that. And there are clear anti-corruption clauses in there. But are those enough to ensure that the trade negotiations are tight enough to make sure that companies don't go the way of bribing their way to get licenses and permits and so on and so forth? So it's another type of discussion, but I think it's something to be incorporated into the bigger sphere of what we should be saying about standards and being open and flexible about the new type of governance that we want to see.
If I can add, I think 17A, what's fundamental, if in the past, whenever a company, someone is being investigated, always the junior officer who was caught bribing to get projects are the one that been convicted at the end being charged. But could be the board that instructed him by hook or by crook, go and get the business. Now, it's different. That will make sure, I don't know now where people really want to be on any board. If they understand what 17A is, I would not easily sign off, because you will be accountable. The board will have now to face the music. So that is good. But at the same time, the loophole, you see, people are talking about beneficiary ownership. This is something else that we need to also come up with clear laws. Otherwise, a lot of people are just hiding behind, somebody else take the blame when their names are not anywhere. So we have to push for some of these laws. But at the same time, I think, back to the earlier issue, if you want to avoid the problems that we are facing today, we need to educate and inform people. People have to understand. Without knowledge, out of ignorance, then people will behave in such a way. So everybody has to play their part in terms of making sure that the message is out there and people are reminded and reminded and reminded all the time.
Thank you so much for that. Believe it or not, we are already, at the top of the hour, and I have to bring this to a close. But I would like to thank all of you. And yes, please go ahead.
Sorry, I just had to say something at the end. I hope you can hear me. Now, engaging discussion, but what I would like to propose is this. Going on from what Terence view is. The thing is, Dr. Anis pointed out that, you need to educate, right? And that has to be at all levels. So, and the issue is, at the same time, there are people in government or even in the private sector who perhaps don't have the level of integrity that we want our young to be ingrained with. What I think is necessary is that we have so many NGOs in Malaysia doing good jobs, but they are at odds with each other. They have their own focuses. Sometimes they are aligned. Most of the time, you see disjointed responses. My suggestion is that when you're looking at upholding good governance in the public sector, because of the new government, it is timely to come forth together collectively, all the relevant organizations, to put out a 10-point, 15-point, 20-point proposal on governance in terms of how public sector should be reformed. Obviously, the difficulty is agreeing on all those 10, 15, 20 points. But
we can agree to disagree.
Yeah, so whatever it is, that I think is the way civil society needs to move. Collectively move forward and then keep reminding that, but the organizations must work in unison. Yep. That's the way to do it, and you need to be consistent with the pressure you apply. And those professional organizations obviously have got different agendas, but they themselves could be brought in. Chambers of Commerce could be brought in, and MICG, I'm sure, will be willing. MIM might be. So things like that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you, Doctor.
I would like to request Yang Berbahagia, Tan Sri Datuk Sri Haji Megat Najmuddin Megat Has, Chairman of the Malaysian Institute of Management, to come on stage to present the token of appreciation to the speakers and panelists.